Hi, I'm Rolf Burrows with Shooter's Paradise. I'd like to take a moment and talk to you about red dot sights. So we all today need a red dot sight, gotta have one. We've gotta have our gun milled to accept the latest and greatest, and that's awesome and cool and good. Red dots are really useful for several different things. I personally use a dot, and I made another video to explain why I do that. So one of the things we hear when a person begins using a red dot is that they can't find the dot. Oh, it's horrible. Every time I bring the gun up and I come up to aim, I can't find the dot, and so they've got their sight, and their rear sight window pops up and there's no dot in it, and then they point the gun and they're doing this and all and looking for the red dot, and then finally the red dot pops up in the window. Okay, now I'm good to go. And so this is a problem because I'm thinking, well, I'm training to use the gun defensively, and if I can't find the dot, well, that's going to be a horrible thing. So what exactly is going on there? Well, I'm convinced that what's happening, the red dot requires a little more finite movement, a little more precise movement in the draw stroke in order to find the red dot properly. And so if we have what I would call less refined draw strokes, so I swing the gun up, the bowling stroke or something like this, if I do that, or if I fish and the gun comes up and it points up and then it comes down like this, I don't have as refined and what I would say as an ideal draw stroke, and that then means I'm going to have a hard time finding the dot. Well, it never was a problem with me for irons, so what gives? Well, what we see with iron sights is oftentimes misaligned sights as we shoot. That's very, very common. And iron sights tend to be much more crude in the size. The front sight size it takes up a lot more real estate on the target than the dot does. So the dot would be a much smaller aiming point. So the aiming that would require a much more refined draw stroke in order to have the dot show up when we wanted it to. So what I'm getting at here is I think the red dot is actually showing us problems with our iron sighted draw. The draw that we've always done actually wasn't that good, because if it was that good, the red dot would show up. So this is something to take into consideration. The red dot actually can be a very useful training aid as we dry fire, because it gets instantaneous feedback on what's happening to the gun as we squeeze the trigger and run the trigger. Oftentimes what you'll see running a red dot in dry fire is you'll see that as I squeeze the trigger, the dot moves. Well, that tells me that I have motion in the gun. As I squeeze the trigger, maybe the dot moves off to the side, telling me I'm pushing on the gun as I'm squeezing the trigger. So the red dot can give instantaneous feedback in how the gun is moving as I'm squeezing the trigger in dry fire. That's really useful. It's a terrific training tool. If you haven't tried it, give it a try. Get a red dot, borrow a friend's at the range or something and dry fire with it, and you'll see some amazing things if you watch that dot move. It's more pronounced with a smaller dot. I shoot a 1 MOA dot, which people think I'm crazy for because it's so tiny, but it works very well for me. I've never had a problem not picking up the dot unless the brightness was not adjusted right. So a 3 MOA dot works very good. It has less shakiness. So the smaller the dot, the more tremor you're going to see in the dot from natural movement. And the bigger the dot, the less movement, the movement will become subdued. So the dot can show us a lot, and it can be used as a diagnostic tool for our training. So the draw stroke that seems to work best to get the dot every time and have it pop up right where you want it is to draw the gun up high, rotate it, join your hands as high as you can, and then ride the ramp up, as some say, so that the gun is presented this way like this. The gun doesn't come up from down low like this and pop up vertically into the window. It is up high and it's extended out like this. That seems to work very well for having the dot pop up right where you want it. So I would say that if I get a red dot and I have a hard time finding the dot, well, I'm using perhaps a more precise aiming system, and that more precise aiming system is showing me errors that I had in my presentation before that I didn't know about. The iron sights don't generally give you that feedback. The red dot absolutely does. While it can be frustrating, it can be incredibly liberating and very powerful if you work your way through this. Because then what happens is you develop a new draw. Rather than coming up in a draw that doesn't work well, you develop a draw that works very well, and your shooting gets better. It's an awesome thing. My theory is that if you shoot a red dot and you improve your skill with a red dot and then go back to an iron sighted gun, you will perform better with the iron sights. So take that, consider it, maybe try it out a little bit, fool with it. You might find it valuable. But thanks a lot for listening and watching. We greatly appreciate it.